Hi everyone, welcome to the session. Thank you for that warm introduction to us all. Absolutely fabulous to be here. My second Singapore FinTech Festival. I love coming to this event. 40,000 people here this year. How amazing. It's absolutely huge, and delighted to be joined by my panelists. As discussed, we're going to be talking all about organisational digital transformation, something that we all face, that we're all dealing with, whether you are in one of the largest traditional financial services organisations in the world or even a smaller, more nimble, agile fintech. It's something that we really have to deal with. I thought we would just kick off going down the line. I always like to ask my panelists to introduce themselves. Everybody can introduce themselves far better than I can. Craig, to my immediate left, literally just got off stage about 5 minutes ago, but now I'm asking you the questions, and you've just been asking all the questions, so it's my turn.
I feel in a very different place, Chloe.
Yeah.
So Craig Ramsay, I work for HSBC. I work on the corporate side within liquidity and cash management. I've got myself into FinTech Dress 2.0, so trying to merge the FinTech look with jeans and a casual jacket with the tie of a bank. Because I think, I have to stand out, because everybody now dresses just in a casual shirt and casual trousers, and that's just so last year.
Well, you're absolutely nailing it. And his tie actually has flamingos on it, if you can't see from there, so you're nailing it. Thank you. That's very, very interesting with digital transformation point there, Craig. John, on to you.
Yes, you made me feel like self-conscious. I didn't wear my shorts up here today. So John Stecher, the Chief Innovation Officer at Barclays. I sit across the group, so basically cover what you would consider kind of thinking about new product development in the 2 to 5 year forward across the investment banks, so sales and trading, corporate bank, et cetera, as well as our retail presence. So do a whole bunch of stuff in the fintech space, trying to weave together what is the bank of the future.
Fantastic. Thanks, John. Michael?
Thanks, Chloe. I only wish I could pull off a flamingo tie like Greg. Well done. Good afternoon. My name is Michael Tang from Deloitte. I lead our global financial services, digital transformation, and innovation practice.
Hi, I'm Pranav from OCBC Bank here in Singapore. I lead the digital business and transformation for the consumer bank and our fintech and innovation group for the group. Been working with a lot of fintechs across Southeast Asia, from all sorts of front-end to back-end processes. Also run the AI lab, so still trying to figure out where AI will lead us.
Fantastic, thank you. And I should say we're sort of representing the globe here. An Aussie who lives in Canada. Craig joins us from London, John the US, Michael from Canada, but has spent the last few years in New Zealand, and then Pranav being a local. So it's actually great to have that big global view here. So let's kick off. I thought the best way to start would be to really define what we're talking about. What does it mean? Organisational digital transformation, and even if you take the digital out, just organisational transformation. I'd love to hear what that means to all of you actually. I won't do all questions to everyone, but I think it's important just to sort of outline this conversation. John, I'll kick off with you there.
Yeah, to me, pretty simply, it just means like actually getting the employee base of the firm, so all the folks that actually work inside of the firm, out of thinking about kind of what do they do repetitive on a day-to-day basis and thinking much more about how can they automate a lot of their work, mainly to free up like brain cycles so that they can actually service the client or the customer in a way that far outstripes what we can do today. And I think that's ultimately like the value that comes out of all of these kind of transformational approaches, is it benefits the end consumer. If you don't have that focus, then you end up kind of breaking down at the end of the day.
Absolutely. Pranav, I mean, OCBC would always look at their end consumer, I would have thought. What's your view there on how you're instilling this in your organisation and defining that term? And also, where does it need to come from? Does it need to come from the very top? That top guy needs to know?
Let me give you a long answer. 10 years ago when I used to do transformation, it was all about define a big strategy and then define 30 initiatives behind that. Right, I think that's changed. The way the organizations need to evolve to this age is to respond to the speed of change, the speed of the way the customers are changing. So I like to talk about organizational transformation in a, of acronym NEAT, right? What is your North Star? Why do you exist, right? Why do you need to be in business? Because that's changing every day, right? The regulation is changing, the technology is changing, the way customers live their lives is changing. So you need to ask that question from yourself again and again. And that answers your first question. To answer that question, it needs to begin right at the top, right from the board to the CEO and down. Yeah. Right? The second is energy. Earlier it was about managing change fatigue and getting change in. Now it's about can you create the energy in the organization to change itself. Third is ambidexterity. the ability to find new direction and then scale it very efficiently like a publicly listed company is expected to do. So the processes, the mindsets that go around with that, and every company has a different way to do that. And finally, it's about talent. It's about the diversity. It's about what we call internally the OCBC rebels, right? Who are the people who are going to help you through this journey?
The rebels, I love it. That's awesome. Craig, in the sort of pre-call before we were planning the panel, you made a really good point about wholesale versus retail, and there's obviously a big audience here. What's your view then on the different kind of elements of an organisation and how it might differ when it comes to organisational digital transformation?
I think digital transformation it's a great term, and I think you have to be client-led, whether that's a corporate client or a retail client, and we've talked a lot about that. But when you're solving for a corporate, actually there's a finite number of problems you want to probably solve for. And I think one of the things we see from a retail perspective where you can do lots of proof of concepts, you can do lots of testing and learning. I think it's much more difficult to test and learn with a corporate who is looking at, a very clear problem statement. So for us, focus on the client need first. And I think the term transformation suggests there's a start point and there's an end point. And I think what we are trying desperately to do is actually help culturally, and we'll talk about that later. There is no start point to this journey, and unfortunately there is no end point to this journey. And you have to actually think about how you can actually be able to achieve that change a bit to the point of constantly, continually ongoing.
Yeah, and always evolve, John.
I was going to say, I'd say I think one of the nice things about working at a global bank that has, both the retail presence and the corporate/institutional sales and trading is you can learn a lot from both the businesses. There's a ton of stuff that's portable directly back from sales and trading into the retail franchise today and vice versa. So the retail group has been, on the forefront of mobile for a long time. People are now just starting to think about how do I actually mobilize my sales and traders and get them off the desk so they can be more efficient, right? Vice versa, you have something like a regulatory change like open banking or PSD2 coming into play, which basically makes a lot more of your savings accounts or your checking accounts more liquid, that you can actually kind of trade them now on open exchanges in the UK and across Europe. So all of those things, I think if you just look within the organization and find the right people, you can pull them together to build some pretty creative solutions.
Yeah, absolutely, and keep the lights on while you're doing all that. Michael, I will come to you, and it was deliberately to have you at the last for this one. I mean, Deloitte, we're sitting on the Deloitte stage. This is what you do. You advise huge organisations on this. So tell me about how you go about doing that and what's your strategy when advising other companies, and I'm sure like many of the companies in the room today.
Yeah, let me just touch on just framing even the definition of transformation and unpack it, and then we'll talk a little bit about kind of what we see at some of our clients. I mean, if we unpack even the term, whether it's digital or organizational transformation, just focusing on the word transformation, I mean, that really implies the opportunity of actually changing business models, revenue models, cost models, even operating models, right? And not to challenge Greg, but be a little bit provocative, I'm not sure if there's actually a beginning or end, because what we're seeing is they're no longer transformation projects or programs. These are steady state, BAU, embedded initiatives that need to be both in the business and the corporate structure. So I think when we really look at the opportunity of transformation, it's not necessarily, what I use the analogy, making a caterpillar move faster with RPA and robotics, because you're essentially doing the same thing in terms of an operating model, just more productive and efficient, and it's the same business model, how you make money. You want to take a look at using the same analogy, the metamorphosis to a butterfly, so you're actually changing your business model and how you operate. And I think, to your point, talent and culture and mindset is one of the largest drivers. Technology, although complex, it's actually quite simple compared to managing in humans, right? And we have this framework, what we call digital DNA. And what it really is we take a look at up to 23 traits of what a digital organization looks at and how it actually breaks down from everything from mindset and culture. And these would be things like, are they deliberately, being collaborative? How do you flatten organizations, right? Are you continuously fostering innovation within the group? And the concept here is to provide some degree of diagnosis and figure out where you need to be as an organization and make some strategic choices and nudges and initiatives moving that culture and mindset along the maturity curve around the digital transformation.
Yeah, I've always loved that phrase, culture eats strategy for breakfast. I'm sure everybody is familiar with that, and I mean, this really is true to this point. We are going to come on to culture, and I absolutely love that conversation, but okay, let's then talk now, and we'll move on to a little bit about this human element. So we've got the transformation happening, hopefully, and that's a tough thing to happen. How do you galvanize the troops in an organization to really get on board with that when there's the concern of job security, that psychology behind, you know, is a robot going to take my job? I spent a great day yesterday walking around the festival, and that conversation was really prevalent. Just keen to hear the panel's view on that. Craig, I might start with you.
So I think there's an informal network in any organisation, and there's the formal structure. And I think the focusing on the informal structure is actually quite key in driving the human element and the people element, because within your informal structure, you will have advocates on change and actually not look at the negative side of things, but actually look on the positive. Because if you look at RPA, you look at artificial intelligence, in essence, if you frame it right, why wouldn't you want to get rid of your 30% of your drab activities on a day-to-day basis and actually now spend 30% on actually the fun stuff and the stuff that actually is solving real client problems? And as long as you communicate correctly, as long as you identify the advocates in the organization, I think you'll get a really positive conversation going. And that human element is really key. And it's communicate. And the last point I'd make is allow people to, in essence, learn within a boundary. And we've got analogies coming out of everywhere. For me, it's actually allowing you to make mistakes and making a hole in your boat above the waterline, because that allows people to get confident, be able to take that forward, and that will actually, again, create the momentum that allows you to achieve that.
Yeah, that's awesome. I can see Pranav nodding away at the end there.
Yeah, I mean, I can't agree more. I think it's about communication, right? And I think it's about a very deliberate effort to understand what that impact is, because I think there's a lot of, noise in the popular media about this impact of robots, killer robots, I don't know what all, right? RPA is going to take away jobs. I think, first of all, it's a very, as businesses, we need to be very clear which are the jobs which will actually be displaced, which are the jobs which will be impacted, and have a very clear communication strategy to address both, those categories. So, for example, I think we've gone out and stated that 50% of our teller staff is going to be impacted. But what we promise these guys is that, guys, you're not going to lose your job. You are going to become digital ambassadors, and this is what your job role will be. And by the way, here are the training programs that you need to go around doing that. In addition, right, I mean, I think it's all about that positive communication, right, about RPA, for example. I think we are a very automated bank already. However, there's so much of nonsense that goes on, People are actually looking forward to this solution so that the mundane jobs can be taken away. But the onus is on us, the transformation and the management guys, to create that excitement, the videos, the stories behind it, and that stories and those heroes of people who have adopted that change. I think that's absolutely critical to get that energy flowing.
Yeah, I think that's a real gold nugget of this conversation, that communication piece. It sort of sounds obvious. I actually haven't heard that, a million times during this conversation, but that's so important, isn't it? When you just know what's going on, it just takes that whole pain and anxiety. People do have anxiety about their jobs and what might occur. John, we were having a great chat backstage about, this whole expectation of when something changes, that immediate resistance to go, oh, well, I didn't expect that, and that feels a bit unusual. And then about 2 days later, you go, okay, yeah, I'm cool with that now.
Yeah, I mean, my thought is like communication's one thing. I think it's great, like top-down messaging about here's all the great things you can do. I think it's also a matter of like you have to show people the value of it in their own personal lives, because ultimately like, people act as an individual unit. They act as a unit for their family. That's kind of first and foremost. You have the whole pyramid of needs kind of structure set up, right? So I think understanding like employee psychology and being able to actually like touch them and have them understand, like if we're rolling out something from RPA, which I think is overhyped to the max, if we're rolling this stuff out, right, for the most part, here's what it's actually going to give you, and then show them the benefit of actually, it gives you 40% of your time back. Here's the great stuff that you can do with that 40% of your time. Here's how it matters to the business's bottom line, and here's how it matters to like your paycheck at the end of the year as well. And like that's what we found kind of so far in small pockets has really connected with people inside of the firm, is that kind of talk about it and then show them approach.
Yeah. Absolutely. I want to jump onto the culture conversation, and Michael, I am going to start with you because you had some great points about this in the pre-chat as well. But let's talk about what culture really means. Communication sounds like it's a pretty big part of culture in this conversation, but what culture really means, what it takes to perhaps transform a culture. Is it to keep a culture the same as a business grows? Just keen to hear your view on that.
I think from a human element, most humans are probably uncomfortable with uncertainty and change. And I was lucky enough to have some training from a 5-star military general, and he introduced a term called VUCA. And VUCA stands for volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. I think as part of that cultural change, we need to either build talent, hire talent, or train talent to be comfortable in those type of environments, just given all the different pressures within our industry and given all the moving areas ranging from exponential and emerging technologies, regulators, changing customer demands. So I think part of the culture, what I find interesting is if you believe culture is defined as either shared values or principles where you make some decisions, and they can be shared through the organization through storytelling, handbooks, and the whole bit. But the irony of this is, change is tough. And if you think about the processes of a bank, it's in a way just to really mitigate risk. So you actually want predictability, right? Discipline, rigor in your business processes. And what happens when you want to infuse change and innovation if you were an organism? Your antibodies and your departments of no start coming out everywhere and infuse change. So the paradox here is, although culture is trying to instill a level of discipline and rigor, at the same time we're trying to get our talent and the culture of the organization to change. So I think that's one of the most challenging parts. And I think overall, I think it actually takes time. It's not like one day you can declare yourself, we're going to be a digital organization. It takes time.
Yeah, great.
And I think people talk in the third party about culture rather than personalize it to yourself. And I think we spend a lot of time in HSBC trying to embed the culture at a team level, almost like the Russian dolls opening up, and we've got the top level, but actually as you go down, whichever team you're in, whichever part of that Russian doll, personalize it, talk about it, create it. And if you can control your own element of culture within your own team, and everybody's doing that, then actually the culture that everybody talks about in the third party is actually happening. And I think that's really key for organizations to think about in the longer term.
I mean, excuse the pun, but culture is like a living thing, right? And I don't just mean that as in culture, but within an organization, it has to be nurtured and encouraged. John, you want to add there?
I was just going to say quickly, I mean, in my opinion, I think creating somewhat like a culture of serving the client is actually, it breaks through a lot of the barriers that you were talking about. So if you get into a focus of like, what does the client really want, and how do I basically materialize the no-sayers and the naysayers, as well as the enablers and the innovators around that problem, it breaks down like that barrier. Because ultimately your focus is on, am I hitting it right for the client? And I think that's the thing that I admire most about the whole startup ecosystem that's kind of blown up over the past few years, is like there's a maniacal focus on customer satisfaction and bringing everybody to the table across all functions, legal, et cetera, to make that happen. And that's like, to me, that's I think one of the biggest things from a corporate that we should like really focus on changing.
I mean, I'll just add to that, right? I think, talking about culture is useless, right? I just strongly believe that. I think it's about getting people to do things differently, take them through that process, right? So whether it's, the customer immersion labs where you get, legal compliance and I know offense meant to those functions, but those are the guys who are meant to defend the bank, right? Get them, everyone in the whole value chain, see what it means for the customer in a living example, in front of their eyes. I think that motivates people like anything. Second, is about taking them through new processes. All our processes in the bank have been geared for risk. Unless and until we define those new processes, whether agile, MVP, whatever, we need to find, an organization needs to find what those processes are and take people through them, handhold them through them, and see the energy that creates, and take their voices and take them to their peers, right? Because I'm guilty of this. I've tried to do culture change for a long time, and most of the talk has failed for me. It's about getting people in.
That's really interesting. How much has culture changed in your organisations in recent years? Has it changed a lot, or is the focus on it more steely?
I mean, so I've been at Barclays for about a year and a quarter now, so I can say that, like, I think over the past year that I've been there, I've seen it definitively change. That's nothing to do with me. I'm not like magic. It's just like the firm in general, I think, you know, and instilling a focus on, like I said, you know, client satisfaction and kind of working for the client has actually trickled down. I also think like a reinvestment into like how do we actually get back in the game has changed the culture as well. So putting money to work to actually build interesting technologies, being more open to consume technology from the outside has like a motivating factor on everybody from like leadership to, you know, your new hires that are coming into the firm. So is it perfect? No, not at all. There's a long way to go, but I think it's materially changed. Yeah,
I want to come on to new hires and hiring for the future in a moment, but Craig, just wanted to touch that a little bit further with you. HSBC, enormous global bank. How does culture differ across the bank? Is this a global way that you look at things when it comes to transforming and doing that with culture, or is it very segregated? Just interested.
No, we definitely have a very consistent focus, and for us, it's about ourselves with our customers, helping them thrive in the future, and that really can resonate across the retail and corporate. And again, having a very simple, very focused message from the top allows everybody then to take that and personalize it into how they can then do it within their own particular area. I think the diversity of the large scale of HSBC also helps allow us again to synchronize at a local level in the right way under that particular focus. And that's again very important. You should not forget about your past. You should still be very proud, and we're very proud of the 150 years plus we've been around. We'd like to be around for another 150 years, and so it's about framing the message in a way that we don't forget the past, but we focus on the future.
We talk so much about the future nowadays, don't we? But it's funny when you just mention something like that we would love to still be here in 150 years. It's going to be so interesting to see what on earth is happening in the world in 150 years, let alone in financial services. Let's just go on then to this new, and please do send in questions. I'll be opening it up for questions shortly, but let's just touch a little bit on this new workforce. They're obviously going to need new, different capabilities than ever before. When it comes to building teams to bring together this culture piece, the communication piece, building organisation that can transform themselves, what does this new workforce look like? Where do they come from? What do you look for? What are the attributes?
I think the prior capabilities and skill sets are predicated, we talked about these mundane tasks, they're repetitive, it's kind of paint by numbers and follow a process. I think the softer skills are going to be much, much more important, right? The relationship building, the collaboration, having an analytical mind. And if I were to take a page out of our playbook from our friends at Google, they use a term called a smart creative. And what that really is they're business savvy, but they absolutely have a technology background and foundation, but they have a creative energy to challenge, but at the same time, they're hands-on. So I think those attributes, not necessarily just pure technology, is going to be a big difference, because they're the ones that are going to be able to survive in that environment of volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity.
It would be fantastic to see the education then back up, bringing out these kind of the smart creatives. I love that. So that's really interesting, John.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think hiring is going to change significantly over the next few years. I think that there's always been a focus with like corporates or any business to like hire all the best talent, put it in-house, keep it in-house, right? And it's just honestly, like, to be contrarian, it's completely impossible. Like if you even look at like Facebook or Google, their ability to hire and land talent is like down. I mean, it's, let's say they make offers. I think there was some number out there that it's in the 70 percentile range, people accept it. When you go into the bank perspective, it's even lower. And so I think what you have to get comfortable with when you look at like the organization is hiring anymore is not going to be putting somebody on your own payroll. It might be actually partnering up with like some sort of a fintech or a JV or somebody else in the outside world and placing people into that spectrum. So we had talked earlier about like the AI lab and some of the stuff that goes on there and keeping talent around. It's just not feasible, right? I think you can hire a few experts that have the soft skills you're talking about to connect it to the business and connect it to the customer and serving them. But ultimately, you just have to recognize you can't procure all that talent yourself. And so I think hiring is going to be shifting over the years here is what we're going to see.
Yeah, I think Pranav just...
Yeah, I mean, just to add to that, right? I think you talked about the AI lab, right? I think what is the deep tech skills that are needed? And those things we are competing with everyone in the world, right? So we're competing with all the big tech firms. Everyone is talking about AI. So that's going to be a big challenge for all of us to get those skills. Question is whether we can create the right brand, whether we can create the right purpose that these guys want to relate to, other than the monetary component, right? So that's going to be key. I think one thing which is, I think needs to be stressed more is that, at least in banking, the human relationship is getting more important rather than less important, right? So, for example, in my contact center, right, we don't have any more calls for simple things. Anything that comes in is either an emotionally charged, a complaint or a fee waiver or something. So the skill that is required for the front line to deal with this kind of stuff, when most of the mundane stuff has been taken care of by technology, it's a different level that we are talking about.
The compassion, the empathy, you can't,
Absolutely.
a robot can't do that quite yet.
And I'm not going to talk about hiring necessarily. I'd like to pick up on a slightly different topic, that actually within your own organizations, you already have the talent probably. And actually, how do you actually take the talent that exists within and retrain them and upskill them? Because actually training them is 7 times less expensive than possibly going out into the market and competing. And one other thing that we are trying to do within parts of HSBC is what we call reverse mentoring. Because actually the 25-year-olds are the future, and we're training the 50-year-olds like myself, I've given my age away, on how actually we should interact digitally, how we should act from an Instagram perspective using a mobile, because actually the executive level is not 25 yet, certainly in HSBC. But if they don't understand the skills, the mindset, the way people think today, you're not going to be able to break through and create that transformation journey that we've talked about at the beginning.
That's awesome.
I think you actually, you touched on a really great point, is being able to actually retrain or kind of reprogram folks that you already have inside of your firm is a huge thing that everybody should be focused on. So there's companies out there like Udacity, Pluralsight, et cetera, that are really focused in this space. And there's a number of companies that I've seen, like AT&T is one of them, that's actually use these companies to go off, create nano-degree programs, retrain folks in essence with Python scripting skills so they can become new data center engineers versus call center engineers. And so it fills a lot of their open headcount, and it just makes people more loyal to the firm. So I think that's a great point. And it's hard to get an organization to move down that path and actually focus on that and spend money on it, because it's not a tangible thing. But I think it's a great thing that I've seen some other organizations do.
Awesome. Don't worry with the age thing, because you're wearing jeans and the flamingo tie, so you've still got it there. I heard this awesome quote yesterday. I interviewed Peter Swartz, who was VP from Salesforce, who's one of the sort of keynote speakers kicking around yesterday, and he was saying the illiterate of the 21st century will be those who are unable to sort of unlearn and relearn things. Exactly to your point, Craig. Excellent point. Look within the organization before finding all these amazing, the digital creatives that you're talking about, Michael, but maybe we've already got some of them.
One caution that I would like to point out that we see, unfortunately, is some organizations believe they can just put up a digital garage or an innovation lab. And what actually happens is you start getting the cool kids club. And the core of the organization may misread it if you don't communicate the purpose of it correctly by saying, well, does that mean we're not innovative, we're not creative, we're not digital? And you actually have major tissue rejection in the organization. So the caution would be, I absolutely agree, and I love the term reverse mentoring. And it gives those individuals even greater purpose because they get access to the executives. But you just got to be cautioned that you don't create a cool kids club and actually alienate the individuals that are bringing in your revenue each and every day.
Yeah, and make it exclusive, so it's a part of that's a brilliant point there. Okay, we're going to get a little controversial. Craig brought this one up. I'm just going to throw him out there, but he wanted to talk about this controversial point. I know that I can actually see many people in the room. I just wanted to get a show of hands, and I'm only going to give 2 options, but I'd love to know in the room who is from a more traditional financial services organization, and then the other one's going to be from a fintech, or let's just say big tech and tech in the same. So first, traditional. Okay, it might be about half. And then other hands up for the sort of fintech among us and the, okay, few less, but interestingly, a bit of a mix in the room. That's helpful, thank you. That was a really digital poll that I just did then for our digital transformation panel. But what we wanted to talk about, the impact that a traditional organisation can really make when it comes to digital transformation versus a fintech, and what they can create and what they can do. When we talk about the critical mass, and the big guys have the numbers, for now at least. Craig, your view on that? I mean, this is something you raised on the call, and I think it's a really interesting conversation to have, and we want to think about what we can learn and maybe avoid from fintechs.
It's great there's less fintechs listening to the big banks.
I know.
If we're in with 5 fintechs up here, I bet there's a lot more big banks listening to the fintechs, but that's another matter. I think what we discussed, Chloe, was there are some great things about fintechs, but there's also some not so great things. And again, when you're in a large organization, what's good and what's not so good? And for me, I love the passion, I love the pace that fintechs can provide. I love the expression pivot. It didn't come around until fintechs. That's basically, I got it wrong, let me find out the next thing I can do to possibly make money.
Pivot. Sounds cooler though, saying pivot.
Unfortunately, I think I work for a company that is more like a Titanic than a little speedboat. So pivoting is quite long and quite, it takes us some time. So I think the pace of change that fintechs bring to ourselves as large organizations, and how they talk about corporates, about how quickly they will actually deliver, I think you have to take with a pinch of salt. We do over 4 billion transactions a year, and I don't care what people say, I don't think a high percentage of those are going to be done on new fintech technology in the next 12 months.
Okay.
Therefore, we have still that 95, 98, 99% of what we're doing with corporates, and trying to align the message with our corporates around, this is what you're doing today, this is the future, and here is the path to migrate to the future, and we're helping you there, but don't underestimate, we're still going to support you back here as you go through that journey, is really key. And I think that's a message I think resonates very much with our corporate clients.
Yeah, absolutely. Michael?
Like, I would echo the point that, speaking and working with a lot of fintechs, passion is absolutely prevalent and important. But I would challenge that it's not just passion, it needs to be passion with contribution. So for example, maybe a couple years ago it was amazing to say, we're doing all these proof of concepts and experiments with fintechs and learning. But for those of you that run P&Ls and businesses, it's just like, I don't need more experiments. When can it get into production at scale and actually have some commercial value, right? So just having passion is probably not enough. You need a degree of contribution.
Yeah. Back it up with contribution. I love that. Pranav, I was going to come to you. Singapore, obviously, such an enormous community when it comes to the partnership piece that we were talking about before. Your perspective then on this fintech piece, things to learn, things to avoid?
Yeah, I mean, I think absolutely what has worked is, the energy that the startup partners bring to us. And, for us, we follow a frugal innovation methodology. So it's always the startup paired with the internal folks who are driving the project. So that working together is magical both for the staff in the bank and for the fintech, right? However, again, the challenges are that taking an idea, a POC into production, getting business results out of that is hard work. So, all the things that we talk about, agile and speed to market, etc., that promise has not come true in its complete entirety, right? It gets us access to talent, but the reality of the financial services regulated world, there are a lot of meaningful barriers to go through, and those exist for a reason, and they can't be thrown away. So the speed argument, etc., honestly has not flown for us. The talent, the working together, bringing about cultural change, new ideas, definitely it's great stuff in the collaboration.
We've touched on so many interesting points in the panel, and I said we'll be coming to those questions in a couple of minutes. I thought it'd be interesting just to touch on here any blind spots in this conversation of organisational digital transformation, perhaps blind spots or where you're focusing your attention to really sort of combat this challenge, if you like. John?
Tough question. I was trying to think through an answer.
You looked at me like, I'll take it.
I looked at you, sorry, to take the answer, or take it. I think one of the blind spots that I see is trying to get people to understand and quantify risk right, from working with some of like the fintech companies on the outside world. And I think like part of the problem, as you guys like raised your hand before, of being like a legacy FI or kind of a bigger FI, for the most part, like the onboarding process is slow, and it's slow for a reason. It's because you want to actually vet that these companies that you're going to work with are going to protect ultimately your customers' data. Because the reality is I think people want the speed, like you were talking about. They want to see stuff get to market as quick as possible, but they don't understand the ramifications of a data loss. And if the fintech down the road is the one that loses your data, like Barclays ultimately is going to be the bearer of the bad news and the bearer of lawsuits probably, right? And so it's one of those things, that's a blind spot that I just see. And so we've tried to shift folks inside of their organization quite a bit, is to make sure that they're just thinking of that like at the front of their mind when they're engaging with these companies. Is like, what is like data security being a paramount thing, right? So all the fintechs out there, like it's, advice for you guys is when you come in to like, meet with any of these banks, I think the more you can articulate what is your like cybersecurity policy, how do you protect people's data, how do you ensure that there's all the consent set up, it just gets you through the door quicker and makes people believe you faster.
Yeah, when the rubber hits the road, that's what matters, the security. But we could have a whole other panel on security. Michael?
I think one blind spot is what I find interesting working with a lot of larger organizations is the concept of like a target operating model or a target organization or a target architecture. Because in reality, like by the time you get to that actual target, things have moved on, right? So you think about that children's fable, like the three little pigs, and having that brick house is good. Well, I think in our environment right now, with all the changes, you actually want that straw house first, because if something doesn't work, then you can quickly reshuffle and pivot and change your direction. And like one of the worst things you can put up is an org chart, because it looks rigid, it looks like there's formal reporting structures, and to your earlier point, it's the informal networks and underlying and supported with culture that actually makes the transformation, not having this rigidity of a target operating model.
Yeah, but keeping the communication with that so that everybody knows what's going on, right?
And I'd love to echo Michael, because it's people power. The blind spot for large operational transformation is actually it's all about the people. It's not about technology. It's not about a process. And people, individuals, teams are the most forgotten about area within most organizations. And again, I love the fintechs, because when you talk to a lot of the fintechs with passion, they are so passionate about their people. They are so behind their people. And that would be certainly something that we larger organizations could probably learn from.
Yeah, fabulous. Okay, we have had quite a few questions come through. That was good. I opened it and nothing had come, but I needed to refresh it. I was thinking we were so scintillating that no one had time to ask a question. Right, something which has 7 votes. What are some key enablers to empower employees across all levels of an organization to embrace digital transformation? Good point. Who wants to take that one?
I didn't hear it.
Michael?
It's really difficult to hear. What was the question?
Oh, pardon me. Sorry. So what are some of the key enablers to empower employees, that's that personal piece, across all levels of an organization to embrace digital transformation?
I think if you have to go empower someone, then you've kind of missed the boat as well, right? I think if you take a look at one of the traits of fintechs is you have a much lower hierarchy, and even the decision rights, right, are very different. You're not necessarily going to a boss every time. So I think instilling and actually learning from some of the fintechs in terms of the decision-making process, flattening hierarchy, and having different levels of contribution. I think, quoting Amazon, I think one of their practices is in their meetings, they actually have the most junior person ask the questions first, right? Because then you don't fall into this term called HIPPO, the highest paid person's opinion often change. So I think the empowerment should be throughout the organization, not necessarily the most senior person in the room.
I love your analogies. We've got 3 little pigs, hippos. We've spoken about the Titanic. This has been a whole panel of analogies. I absolutely love it. Right, we've got another one. Oh, it moved. Okay, yes, I liked this one. It's moved again. Oh, yes. What is that one big area that we need to focus on to cater to customers of all generations to stay relevant?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think the biggest thing to me is like adaptive UIs and CXs in the future. I think it's unbelievably hard to build one user interface that covers a whole spectrum of age and demographics. So everything from 18 to 99, people that are colorblind to people that have like, vision impairments, et cetera. I think that's kind of like the next forefront of what you're going to see in banking. And I think that's something people should be looking at, is how do you actually make that work across the board? And it's very hard. It's actually why a lot of fintechs have been successful, is they focus on a very narrow vertical, and they're able to capture people. If it's a millennial banking app, if it's a Starling, et cetera, Monzo, Revolut, it targets a very specific demographic. The UX is laid out very specifically. It's not targeting my 80-year-old parents, right? So it's just, I think that's something we'll have to see people focus on a lot more.
Pranav, what's OCBC doing in that area for all generations that you cater towards?
Still working towards it.
Yeah. Okay.
I think to his point, right, and we were discussing when we were in the behind the scenes, is like Facebook changes, one button every day. You don't even notice this most of the time, right? For most of the banks, the release cycle is, monthly, quarterly, whatever, for all our, direct to customers interfaces, right? And it's very rigid. For all segments, we tend to, maybe some banks have multiple segments, but by and large, we end up with the same thing. So I think first of all, the ability for us to understand those needs, the nuances, so having the right design skills, right, and then having the ability to, deliver this in a seamless manner in our legacy IT environments. I think those are critical skills. But maybe before that, the motivation to do that, and that requires the CX people and everyone on the bar,
So let's be a bit more challenging. I love the UX, I agree. I think it's really simple. The one big area, add value. Make it that the individual that is actually your customer wants to do something with you. And actually, if they do, even not a great UX, is actually they're going to do that because you're actually adding the value. And people are losing sight on what problem am I trying to solve and what value am I adding in this interaction. And the sexiest app, if it actually doesn't add to me, my 99-year-old or 70-year-old mum ain't going to use it. But if it saves her, time every day, she will use it. And that's, I think, what we have to always focus on, value.
Yeah, it's KISS, isn't it? Keep it simple, stupid. That's what's making me think of that. I've got another good question that, this just went out. I'm great at this thing, aren't I? Right. I really liked this one, and this actually lines into one of the last questions that I had for the panel today, but we've got 7 votes for this. I'm going to start with you, Craig, actually. What are some of the key wins that you have done to personally empower your team and change the culture of your organization, and what was the result of it? That's a great question.
I'm really happy you asked me first, Chloe. So what are some of the key wins? I actually let people do rather than control. And so it goes back to some of the things before. I have a global organization structure. They can't get hold of me 24/7. So I just try and say, if you can't get hold of me, think about what I would say and then just do it. And I will protect you and I will back you all the way through. And to create that trust for them allows them to really feel empowered and actually make decisions and take forward. And I think that has really helped us in working within the organization. And the other thing I ask, and we've worked really hard on, is we never take credit for anything we do in innovation, and it comes a bit back to the earlier point. We don't have sexy beanbags, we don't have a sexy shop face. We are actually just on a normal desk working, and we are continually focused on saying that's your job that you've done, you have actually achieved that, it is yours to take forward. Because that migration into BAU, if you start that day one, you've got a chance of actually doing it when it needs to happen.
That's an important point, to celebrate those wins when change has occurred. John, how do you lead as a leader of a big team? And I guess to this point as well about empowering teams at Barclays.
Yeah, I mean, echo the same thing. I think trust and empower is pretty much the most powerful thing you can do from a management perspective. If you can actually trust your employees, empower them to do great stuff, and then let them take credit for it, that's the kind of, to me, the sign of the best managers that I've ever had in my life, and I try to kind of push that down for what I do. I think also being able to go to war for them as well. When they passionately believe in something and they want to get something done, and you have a bunch of people saying no to them, and you believe it as being right as well, is to help them, right? And to help them see how to position the argument and how to kind of get something done, because that's what ultimately will move the organization forward. And it's hard to do sometimes because you take some lumps for it, but I think that's part of what like being a leader and being a manager is, right?
Yeah. I mean, RFI is an SME organisation. We've got about 100 staff around the world. This is just a little point to that. We have something called the Daily Dish, where we all nominate our colleagues, and basically a Daily Dish email goes out, and it's basically, this person did something awesome. So it's a bit of a shout out, celebrating it. I think that's kind of an interesting point there. We've got a couple more minutes for some questions. This is quite a cool question. I like that I see them before you guys do. So when I say this is cool, they think, what's this going to be? Anyway, we all know that change is hard. What is one thing according to you that could make change beautiful? Pranav, down the end there. You weren't looking at me, so I...
Yeah, so I was trying to read the question.
How can we make change beautiful? Change is hard. How can we make it beautiful? Or celebrated, perhaps?
I think it's about creating heroes. It's about creating rebels, it's about celebrating them, right? Celebrating the people who have made the difference, right? As well as the people who have failed, right? So whether it's CEO failure awards, right? I think it's very important to recognize the process of change, to recognize the individuals who took personal risks, right, to achieve that change. That's how I would think about that.
And nobody else is looking at me for that one. Michael, do you want to add anything?
I was just thinking through that question. I mean, let's assume the ultimate change is the result. Maybe one way to make it beautiful is don't focus on the actual result of the change. Focus on the process and the journey and the experiences that you're going through with either your colleagues or your family or yourself during the process of the change. And assuming you do that right, the actual result is the change.
Very philosophical. I love it. John?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I think to me, like, change is hard, and I think it's hard because everybody expects it to be successful, and you don't recognize that for the most part, like, everybody fails 90% of the time. And so I think being able to just recognize the fact that, like, somebody has the courage to attempt to change something and to do something is actually, like, the outcome you want, rather than, like, being able to measure was it successful or failure. And I think that's part of, like, moving the organization forward is, like, you have to get people with, like, the mindset of I need to change, and then you kind of get an organization doing what you want, which is transforming.
Okay, 47 seconds to go. I'm going to ask one last question. What is it that you are absolutely fascinated by in this industry? And when we think about digital transformation, what absolutely fascinates you and is something that you really want to tackle and see going forward in your roles?
So I'm fascinated by the fact that all the ingredients are out there. Actually, it's about if you're a chef and if you're a Michelin chef, because that is what the difference is. Because you read every book, it all tells you the same things. How you put the ingredients together, how you deliver it is the key. So what chef are you?
Love it. John?
I'm not a chef, sadly. I burn everything. Sorry, man. So I guess what fascinates me most, honestly, is that finance is honestly as old as time. I think it's interesting that, like, payments, everybody thinks is new. People were trading cows for corn way back in the day. Like, nothing's really changed in the space. I think it fascinates me the way, like, us humans can kind of consistently keep adapting, like, the finance industry forward to make, like, our lives better. And so, like, I'm fascinated with that part of change and then getting the people kind of around it to make that happen.
Thank you. Michael?
I think what fascinates me, blows my mind is, 40,000 people here all around the same kind of theme, and knowing what we know and the lack of urgency or criticality or velocity of which we can change. Not that we don't want to change, but that we can change. Like the lack of criticality.
Thank you. Pranav, to finish with you.
All right, that's a tough one. For me, it's the perfect storm right now, right? This is a time when people are ready for change. If we just did an exercise, we created a reliquary. We looked at how we were doing things 5 years ago, and we put some of those things, including some of those mobile phones out there, and it's changed in 5 years. Forget about the last 50 years, right? And just imagine the possibilities 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road. So this is the perfect time to be in this industry and lead this change.
I love it. Imagine the possibility. We'll close on that. Please join me in thanking my panel. Thank you so much for being here.